So welcome to this session on acing the writing tasks. This was a live session last night, but the recording wasn't great, so I'm re-recording a better quality version for you today. So this evening we will be working through a presentation which we will be looking at approaches to tackling written tasks in assessments, and you'll be given an opportunity to interact too. So let's get started. So this evening we will be aiming to look at what effective communication is and why it's an important skill. We'll be looking at the AAT's approach to testing communication at the different levels, the process we go through when reading and answering questions, some reasons why we might face difficulties answering questions, the required elements of effective communication, examples of questions and answers at different levels, and how we can improve our communication skills generally. So we'll be sharing tips and techniques which are proven to work. So before we go into detail, it's important to consider what effective communication is. So communication is effective when one party shares information with another and it's received and easily understood in the way that it was intended. Generally, most of us find it easier to communicate face-to-face because we don't have to put as much effort into ensuring our communication is right first time. If the information we share is not easily understood, the receiver can ask questions and provide us with feedback, which gives us another opportunity to get it right. With the written word, and particularly in assessments, we have to work harder at ensuring we get it right first time. Your AAT qualification provides you with the opportunity to develop your communication skills, and it should be embraced, so let's look at the reasons why. You want to be noticed for all the right reasons. So a friend of mine, Fiona Talbot, is a business language expert, and she's published numerous books, and one of my favourites is Make an Impact with Your Written English. In the book, she explains how important it is for businesses and people to get noticed for all the right reasons. So whether you think it's right or not, your written words are judged by your audience when you're not there to explain them. Let's consider the impact of poor writing skills. So this was a sign erected outside a private school that charges a substantial amount in school fees. Can you spot the error? Hopefully you notice that category has been spelt incorrectly. It shouldn't have an R. So for businesses, studies show that a single spelling error on a website can cut sales by 50%. 70% of customers walk away from a business if they perceive pride and care is not practiced. Businesses need to get it right to secure sales and to retain customers. So businesses need to employ people that can write well. It's widely talked about in the media about how frustrated employers are because basic skills are missing. You can have the highest qualification, but if you can't write well, you could halve the chances of securing a job interview, for example. So this is a real example. Can you spot the error here? Hopefully you will have noticed that the person who is applying for the job has spelt job role incorrectly, R-O-L-L. It should be spelt R-O-L-E. So the other issue is that you could significantly hinder your chances of being provided with opportunities for growth and development and promotion if you don't demonstrate good communication skills. It's documented in research that employers have cited that good communication skills is a decisive factor in choosing managers. So let's have a look at another example. Have a little bit of a think about what is wrong with this piece of communication. It's not just about accuracy. The last piece of communication was also quite abrupt, and we really need to be considering about our own, be considerate about our own mood when communicating, and also how our communication will impact on others. Whether it will contribute towards positive working relationships and also get the outcome that we need as well. So let's take a look at AAT's assessment strategies, and you can see how and why writing skills have been tested. So AAT consult with employers to find out what skills are required in the workplace. Then they write the qualification specification, and AAT identify the knowledge and understanding that's required to enable a student to be able to perform the skill proficiently in the workplace. So AAT assess knowledge by asking you to recall information. So they use verbs in their assessments to tell you what to do. So for example, they might ask you to list, make a list, select, name, state, or describe. AAT test whether you understand what you're doing by requiring you to write. So you may be asked to explain, interpret, review, and discuss as an example. And skills are tested by asking you to perform a practical activity. So you might be asked, for example, to calculate, complete, and record, and so on. So next time you look at an AAT assessment, see if you can identify these verbs and link it to whether your knowledge is being tested, whether your comprehension and understanding is being tested, and whether your skills are being tested. The AAT accounting qualification is designed to introduce written skills at level 2 and to gradually build them at each level. So we're going to be talking predominantly about AQ 2016 this evening, but still the hints and tips apply to older qualifications as well. So on AQ 2016, at level 2, there's a brief test of your understanding in the Synoptic assessment. And a Synoptic assessment is the end of course assessment. So perhaps on one accounting topic, but at this level there's much greater focus on the accuracy and effectiveness of communication that's required in today's workplaces. At level 3, they mainly focus on testing your understanding in the Synoptic assessment, that's again the end of course assessment, but over a greater number of topics. Usually at this level there is less emphasis on accuracy, i.e. correct spelling and grammar. And at level 4, writing is tested in all assessments. And in particular, for the Synoptic assessment at level 4, it's essential that you have good reading and comprehension ability, as you'll be presented with lots of written and statistical information which you're likely to be asked to critically analyse and comment on. Okay, so let's have a look. We're going to start with level 2 and we'll look at what is being tested, and we'll use some examples and you can interact with us too. The Working Effectively in Finance unit at level 2 introduces communication as a specific topic that needs to be taught and that will be tested. So the learning outcomes in any qualification specification tell us what the AAT expect you to be able to do. So let's have a look what they're telling us you need to be able to do. They say that you need to be able to produce accurate work in an appropriate format and communicate information effectively. So notice the key words here. Accurate work means that you need to work accurately, so your spelling and grammar is tested at level 2. Appropriate formats means that you need to be able to use, for example, letters, short reports, brief reports at level 2, and emails. And you need to be able to communicate effectively. So that means you need to be able to communicate clearly, concisely, in a logical way, and be easily understood. So let's have a look at what the key features of effective communication are, because this is important at level 2. Here's a useful practical exercise for you to do in your own time. Take a look at pieces of recent communication. Perhaps you've emailed your mentor, a tutor, a work colleague, or a customer, and ask yourself, was it clear, easy to understand? Or could you have taken the time to make it clearer? Was it concise? Did you get to the point quickly? Was it correct? So was it free from error? Was it coherent? So did it flow well, and was it logical? Was it complete? So did it provide all the information needed, or did the person need to ask for further clarification? And was it courteous? So was it polite, friendly, and was the tone carefully considered? The best way to continue to develop your communication skills is to observe how you communicate and learn from how others. So we'll now start to look at questions which we've seen appear in exams over the years. We're going to start with an easy question first, and it will be level 2. So here's the question. Your colleague has asked what a sole trader's drawings are. You're required to send them an email describing what a sole trader's drawings are. So the first step to answering any question is to look for the keywords that tell you what you're required to do. So here you've been asked to describe. So describe means tell us what it is. So here your knowledge is being tested. You're not being asked to do anything more than just simply describe what drawings are. So you've also been told clearly which method of communication to use, so it's an email. And you've been told how many marks the task is worth, so it gives you an idea of the level of depth that you need to go into. So now let's look at a possible marking scheme. So at Eagle we have a team of qualified assessors, and many of us have been working with marking schemes for a range of awarding bodies for many years. AAT are not allowed to tell us how they award marks in computer-based tests, but we have a reasonable awareness from experience to be able to offer you guidance. So let's make a note of the possible marking scheme. You might want to write this down so that you can participate on the next slide. We're being tested on accuracy, so 1 mark might be available for writing that is free from error. We're being tested on the format of an email, so there may be a mark for if you actually provide an email, and then a mark for an email that's presented well. And you've been tested on effectiveness of communication, so what you say should be correct and easily understood, which could also be worth a mark. Now we'll look at some example answers, and you're required to work out how many marks you would award for this response. So using the marking scheme that I've just provided, how many marks would you give for this response? Now if you don't know what drawings are, I'm deliberately not telling you, and the reason for this is that the answer should be easily understood. If the answer doesn't make sense to somebody that doesn't know the answer, then it's not easily understood. So the answer is that this student could potentially earn 3 out of the 4 marks available, even though the answer is not right and it's not easily understood. So let's have a look at how this can happen. 1 mark will be awarded because the email is accurate, it's free from error. 1 mark would be awarded because the student has written an email, and 1 mark is available for good presentation. The answer isn't correct and it's not easily understood, so there'd be no marks for effective communication. So with respect to presentation, I can give you an idea of what an assessor might be looking for. If you've been asked to provide an email, they'll be looking for a greeting and a salutation, which is effectively a hello and a goodbye in business English, and also a main body to the email. So here's a tip. When you write your answer, put yourself in the reader's shoes and critically analyse it. If your response is likely to raise more questions than it answers, then it's not clear, concise, or complete. So let's look at another example. How many marks would you award this student using the same marking scheme? So the student wouldn't earn any marks for accuracy as errors have been made. Did you spot the errors? The S is missing off drawings and the wrong there has been used. It should have been THEIR. They wouldn't have received any marks because we don't know that this is an email. It doesn't look like an email, and they'd lose marks for presentation as well. But they'd earn 1 mark because the answer is correct and it's easily understood. So this provides a really good illustration of how easy it can be to lose marks in an assessment. On the previous slide, the student earned 3 out of 4 marks even though they didn't answer the question correctly. On this slide, the students answered the question correctly but has only earned 1 out of 4 marks. So at level 2, in particular, you have to pay attention to detail. So why don't we get it right sometimes? Sometimes it can be because we simply don't appreciate what's being assessed and how many marks are awarded, but there are other reasons too, which we're going to explore next. Here are some of the reasons why students tell us they don't perform well in writing tasks. The first thing to recognise is that these can be limiting beliefs. If you believe your reasons for not being able to write well, then ultimately you're giving yourself a reason not to even try to improve. Everybody can improve their communication and writing skills. So the first thing is, let's bin the reasons and start to try and understand why we might find writing challenging. So this is the mental process that we go through when we're required to answer a written question. The first thing that we need to do is read the question. Then we search our memories for information. We match the information we're holding in our memories to the question, generate an answer, and write it down. So at every stage of this process, things can go wrong, which results in us not performing well. So let's have a look at reading first. Sometimes a student will email us as they can't work out why the answer to a question is right or why their answer is wrong. Sometimes I reply by rephrasing the question. So I'll say, the question asks, and then I'll repeat the question in a different way. The student often replies saying, I get it now. It's because I didn't read the question properly. So what's worked for them is me rephrasing the question rather than my explanation for the answer. We misread questions for a variety of reasons. In our everyday lives, we are processing millions of bits of information. So to cope, our brains have to filter information. And when filtering information, a number of things can happen. So our brains might choose to be selective about what it pays attention to. And without realizing it, a student could read this sentence. So take a look at the sentence now. And unconsciously, so they don't realize that they're doing it, delete parts of the sentence. You can now see that there's no mention of an email as far as our brain is concerned. Our mental processes happen really quickly. So if we've entered already, as we're reading, if we enter the search, match and generate phase, even though we haven't finished reading the question, if this happens, then we're already starting to search for familiarity. When we search for familiarity, it's possible we might make a broad assumption. For example, the last time I answered a question like this, the answer was. Then you automatically produce a rehearsed response which is not right. Or we can distort the question and alter it so that we can tell the examiner everything we know about the subject but not actually answer the question. All of these potential problems can be exaggerated if we're feeling stressed during an examination, as the brain naturally prepares itself for a fight or flight response. Here's a question for you. Can you spot the error in the very first sentence? You're late for your appointment, so you will have to reschedule it by contacting the office. So you may have already seen examples like this in social networking groups. The question asks whether you can spot the mistake in the very first sentence. The error in the first sentence is the word "the" has been written twice. This caught a lot of people out in our live recording, and it provides an example about how when we're not paying careful attention, it's easy for our minds to trick us. So let's look at some tips to help us overcome reading errors. So how do we overcome these issues when reading? To focus your mind, you need to actively read. Active reading involves reading with the intention of being fully engaged and with the intention to fully understand. Simply rereading text over and over again isn't effective if we're not actively reading. So here are some tips to help you focus your mind. If available in the exam, you can use the highlighting function to highlight key information. So at level 2, we now have an awareness of what the examiner is looking for. So I might highlight the verb that describes what they want us to do, highlight the method of communication that we're required to use, and highlight the topic which we're required to cover. If you have time, read the requirement again to ensure you've understood it. This is a relatively short question, but sometimes there could be more information. So another tip is to use scrap paper. So the exam venue should supply you with scrap paper, and you can simplify the question. So this is a particularly useful tip, especially if English is a second language. The question is simply asking us, what are drawings? And we're required to write an email. So asking yourself the question in a way that is most helpful to you is a great way to focus your mind. The final tip is particularly relevant for level 4 students. In the Synoptic exam now, you're required to read a lot of information before you even get to the questions. I personally find it easier to read the questions first. So don't expect to remember all the questions, but it will help focus your mind more when you read the text, Because if you do it the other way around, what quite often happens is you spend time reading the text, then you read the questions, then you realise you've forgotten what you read and you go back and read it again. So by reading the questions first, it really does help to focus your mind. Also, when reading a lot of text, so say for example there's an A4 page of text that you're required to read, it's a good idea to pause for thought. So rather than reading it all in one go, after each paragraph or substantial amount of information, literally look away and think about what you've read and write your ideas down on a piece of paper or write some notes on a piece of paper, because it really will help again to focus your mind. Now let's look at the next process. This is where we start searching for the information we need from our memory so that we can generate an answer. And for us to be able to do this easily, we need to have stored what we've learned in our memories in the most effective way. So there are models which explain the processes that we use at the different levels of learning, and one widely accepted and used in education is Bloom's taxonomy. At level 2 and at level 3, you're tested on your ability to remember, understand and apply. At level 4, more is demanded of you. And particularly when you go on to for professional studies such as chartered accounting, you're expected to be highly proficient at the higher levels of learning. So at level 2 and 3, the idea is that you have to have knowledge and you have to understand the principles and techniques so that you can perform the skill. When we understand, our brain is more effective at storing and retrieving the information. What we've learnt is deeply embedded and not easily forgotten. When we are learning, though, sometimes we experience difficulty with understanding, so we can adopt a technique of remembering how to perform a skill. So let's have a look at this on the screen. So if we don't work on our understanding and we commit to memory how to perform the skill, then this type of learning is superficial. It's temporarily stored in our brains, so storage and retrieval is not effective. So some of us may not even realise this is what we do. Others openly admit that they commit information to memory in order to pass an exam. If we adopt this technique, though, we will soon get caught out when, let's say there's a change in examiner and they have maybe a slightly different writing style, or maybe the examiner presents information to us in a different way. An examiner changes the question style and answer layout, or when we're required to do it in the workplace, we'll become stuck. So at level 4, you're expected to analyse information and evaluate it so that you can critically comment on it. You will find this almost impossible if you commit information to memory. You'll find studying at level 4 very, very difficult if you have learnt by remembering at level 2 and 3. So you can link all of these skills to the career ladder too. If you learn workplace processes by remembering, you're likely to struggle to progress. If you demonstrate the ability, for example, to critically analyse accounting systems and put things in place to make them more effective, for example, then you'll be well equipped to be working at the top. So to summarise, we'll be more effective at searching, matching and generating when we've created strong connections with the material in our minds. So here are some tips for you. Try to notice if you're committing a process to memory. And then consider why you might be doing it. Is it a habit? When I talk about habits, for example, the school system, sadly, encourages us to remember information rather than understand it, because In my view, there are a lot of complicated things taught to very young people. So we can soon adopt a habit that we think that that's the most effective way to learn is by remembering. Is it because it's difficult? Or it could be because you're tired. So then the next step is, if you are doing that, to adopt strategies to develop a deeper understanding of the content. For example, first most important thing is to be kind to yourself. It's easy to overload our brains and burn ourselves out. We need to give our brains time to process new information and time to store it in an effective way. But if we overload our brains, then that's not going to happen. So it's really important to rest from time to time. Another really important tip is to ask for help. Recently, I struggled with understanding something. I left the office, and it's one of those things. I thought it was a formula. I'm not great with formulas, and I'm not very strong with maths, if I'm being honest. And I thought, you know what? The books just say, here's the formula that you need to use, so I'm just going to have to do the same. But I just can't do it. So I thought, you know what? I need to do something about this. So, at the risk of looking stupid, I called a fellow professional and asked for help, and within 3 sentences, he made it absolutely crystal clear. I'd spent hours struggling the day before, and this provides an example of how working with others can help. Now, when I say at the risk of looking stupid, you don't look stupid when you ask for help. We were all students once, but everybody, even me, has this little like niggling anxiety that you might look stupid if you ask for help. But you need to overcome that, and at the end of the day, think of the outcome, and the outcome is that you're going to understand it much better after you've asked for help. Another tip is to talk out loud. Often we think we know it because we've thought about it internally. But when we attempt to explain it, we realise that we didn't actually know it as well as we thought we did. So talking out loud as you're learning can really improve the quality of learning. Tell someone else is another tip. When we talk to other people, their responses provide us with feedback, and we can use that feedback to continuously improve how we explain things. So you might talk just to a family member who doesn't know, so they're more likely to ask questions, or perhaps even a work colleague, or you could chat with people in our social networking groups in Moodle or in Eagle Education Buddies in Facebook, for example. And the final tip that I have is to teach somebody else. I remember when I was a student and depreciation suddenly clicked for me. My friend was still struggling with it, so she asked me to teach her. Once I did, depreciation was something that I never needed to remember anymore, because through the activity of teaching, it deeply embedded itself in my brain. So there are my tips to help you improve your understanding. But the most important thing is to experiment with different ways of learning, because you may find by doing what you've always done is not necessarily the most effective. So experiment, and then you may surprise yourself with how much you can learn, and perhaps even more quickly by adopting some different strategies. So assessors can often tell whether understanding exists or not, and here's an example. So this time the question requires you to explain why the owner's drawings are not an expense of the business. So now we're going to look at comprehension. So this is understanding. Last time we looked at knowledge and you were asked to describe. This time you're being asked to explain, to test your understanding. And explain means give us the reasons why. Here are 2 answers, so take the time to read them and see if you can identify which student has given us the reasons why. So answer A describes where drawings are recorded. This is correct, but the student hasn't given us the reasons why. They could have read the question incorrectly, of course, but more often than not, an answer like this is produced because they have remembered where they go, but they don't really know why they go there. Answer B clearly explains the reasons why. Not only will answer B earn the marks available in an exam, but the student that provided this answer would be very well prepared for questions like this in the workplace. So the final step in the process is writing down your answer. So the biggest tip here is what you'll do in practice is what you'll do on exam day. It's not sufficient to read the question, think about them, then read the model answer, and then believe that you'll be adequately be prepared for your exam. You have to fully engage with writing so you can gradually develop your written skills as you're studying. So the biggest tip here is to use your pen. Here's an example of how I think. This is the beginnings of this presentation. It's not possible for me to open PowerPoint and start to prepare a logical, methodical and structured presentation. I have what's called a scatterbrain, which probably most people have, where your thoughts are all over the place. So I need to get them down on paper so that I can slowly start to make sense of them. As you think, jot down your thoughts on scrap paper. And the style of doing this will depend on your preferred learning style. You may prefer to write lists of keywords, you may draw mind maps, or you may create a mess just like I do. So if you adopt this technique, you're so much more likely to produce an ordered and well-structured answer rather than hitting the keyboard and spilling out your answer all in one go. So let's take a look at two examples. So ethics is now taught and assessed at all levels. We're going to take a look at a strong answer to this question and a weak answer. And now we're going to use a level 3 example. So you are responsible for training an accounts junior, and they are still in their probationary period. They made an error in the accounts and they attempted to correct the error despite not being authorised to do so, as they thought they were being helpful. However, they made the error worse. They decided not to own up to it as they'll look bad and they don't want to lose their job. So the question is, describe the ethical principle that has been breached here and explain why. So I'll briefly tell you what the answer is so that what follows is more meaningful to all people. The ethical principles basically tell us how we are expected to behave as accounting professionals. One of those principles is integrity, which means that we are required to be honest. So let's write down the marking scheme. So have your pen and paper ready. So 2 marks may be given for identifying the principle of integrity. 2 marks may be given for describing what integrity means, and 2 marks for a valid reason. So let's have a look at an example. How many marks would you give for this answer? This answer would earn full marks. The approach is excellent. They've actively read the question and identified the verbs which tell them what they're required to do, which can be seen from the underlining. So in this question, they were asked to describe and to explain. There is evidence that they've paused for thought, as there is a little bit piece of paper on the side there with some notes in the margin, and the approach has enabled them to provide a clear and concise structure which answers all parts of the question. So the first thing that they did was identified the principle, so they earned 2 marks for that. They then explained what integrity means, so they get 2 marks for that. Described, and they get 2 marks for providing the reason why the principle has been breached. So here's another example. How many marks do you think this student would earn using the same marking scheme? I believe that this student would potentially earn 2 marks. I say potentially because they haven't actually identified which ethical principle has been breached. However, they've talked about honesty. So you need to try and avoid giving an examiner a reason to wonder if marks should be awarded or not. Clearly the student knows about the ethical principle of integrity, but they've not been able to earn full credit. It's likely that they've immediately hit the keyboard after reading the question and spilled out all of their thoughts, which are all valid, but they've not actually answered the question. It's likely that the student believes they've fully answered the question though. You'll notice that the student made some errors. At level 3 and 4, when your knowledge and understanding are being tested, spelling and grammar are not usually tested. However, if you're specifically asked to write a memo or a report, which is a typical question at level 4, there could be marks available for accuracy and presentation. So just to be on the safe side, it's best to work as accurately as you can throughout your assessment. How many marks would this student earn? It's likely that this student would earn 4 marks. 2 marks for identifying the ethical principle and 2 marks for providing a valid reason. But 2 marks would be lost if they didn't describe the ethical principle. So another tip to share here is once you've done your answer, reread the question and then ask yourself, did I describe the principle? Did I explain why it has been breached? This may help you to identify if you've overlooked one of the requirements. So this question had 2 requirements in 1 sentence, so you really do need to take care to identify them all. Sometimes, however, AAT put each requirement in bullet form, so we'll look at this style of question next. You usually see this style of question at level 4. Prepare a report for the finance director recommending whether or not to use the supplier for the product. Your answer should comment on the company's profitability, liquidity, and financial position. Consider how the company has changed over the 2 years, and include a comparison with the industry as a whole. And you can see that this question is worth 12 marks. If you've been specifically asked to prepare a report, you can almost guarantee that marks will be available for structure and potentially for presentation and accuracy, as the method of communication is being tested as well as your knowledge. So your report needs to be structured so that it's easy to read and so that the examiner finds it easy to award marks. Our recommendation is to use headings and subheadings, as this really focuses your mind. You can roughly plan the structure on scrap paper before you start typing. Sometimes when you read model answers, perhaps in published texts, you'll see reams and reams of writing. However, it's equally, if not more effective, to be concise and deliver the same message using less words. You may even consider using bullet points to ensure that every requirement is met. So you can see here, for each ratio, we're going to make a comment on the result, how it has changed over the 2 years, and how it compares to industry average. Don't forget an introduction as well as a conclusion, particularly as the question required you to make a recommendation. The more you practice this skill, the quicker you'll be able to put together a structure which provides an answer for all of the requirements. So let's take a brief look at Level 4 writing style, because it's really important. So writing style is covered in detail in our Level 4 study materials, but we'll touch on it here as it's very important to pay attention to. At Level 4, you really need to focus on writing sentences that leave the examiner with no doubt that you understand what the result means. For those that do not know this ratio, operating profit margin, it measures how much profit has been earned from sales and expresses the result as a percentage. So let's have a look at an answer that could be considered weak and may earn very little credit in an exam. Here the answer says operating profit has increased. So what does increased mean? Does it mean that it's better or worse than the year before? It says that operating profit was higher than industry average. What does that mean? Does it mean it's better than industry average or worse than industry average? I hope you can see that these statements are not complete, as they raise questions. Anybody can look at a percentage and say it's higher or lower, it's increased or decreased, but unless a meaning for those words is provided, then it's meaningless. Now let's take a look at a strong answer. This answer clearly explains what the results mean. In 2017, 2p more operating profit was earned from each pound of sales than in 2016. Operating profit has improved over the 2 years. The business's operating profit margin is better than industry average, as it's earning 4p more operating profit per pound of sales. So a person who has never seen the ratio before would understand each sentence and understand that the business is doing better than the year before and better than an industry average. It's complete, clear and concise. I emphasise concise as we've used bullet points to provide the answer. We've not had to write paragraphs of information in order to answer the question and be easily understood. So currently, the year of recording is 2017. The Synoptic exam at Level 4 requires more reading than ever before as well. So the biggest tips we can give you are, you'll be better prepared if you do not try to guess what you're going to be tested on. Be prepared for anything. Read the questions first, then when you read, your mind will be more focused. As you read, pause for thought and use scrap paper to jot your thoughts down. Look at the marks available. So in AQ 2016 assessments, the marks are provided. This should give you an indication about how much to write. There's no rule, but generally a 12-mark question would require more writing than a 3-mark question. Practice, practice, practice. As you're studying, do not skip the writing tasks. As we said earlier in the presentation, what you do in practice is what you'll do on exam day. And get some feedback from others, especially a tutor who is used to working with marking schemes, as they can critically comment on your work. We have, amongst us, around 20 years experience, so we really can add value, even if it's just once, that you submit something once to improving your written work. So when I first started teaching AAT, my communication skills were average or even below average, as I remember constantly being corrected by other tutors and sometimes students as well, which was rather embarrassing. Now I'd say that my writing skills are really good, and it's all because I made a conscious effort to improve. So all of Eagle's website and our brochures on my writing. So you'll be able to see that my business has significantly benefited and my career as a result of me improving my writing skills. So to improve over the years, I've read books and attended workshops, but I often observe how others communicate and reflect on why it's got my attention and why it's effective. It's really sad, but sometimes when I'm in traffic, I actually find myself proofreading vehicles. At Eagle, we're all encouraged to read each other's writing on a regular basis, as we know it's proven to make a difference to our own writing. And if you're keen to improve your writing and the way you communicate, then the best thing to do is to start reading, reflecting, and altering the way you write to see if it makes a better impact. So thank you for taking the time to watch our webinar. We welcome any feedback that you'd like to provide us in order for us to continue to improve and develop our webinars. And remember, if you're a student at Eagle, please email any questions you may have directly to your mentor